According to his account, Langston Hughes wrote his most famous poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, as the train he took from St. Louis to Mexico to visit his father passed over the Mississippi River. At the time, Hughes was 17. He wrote, "All day on the train, I'd been thinking about my father and his strange dislike for his own people." Hughes remembered, "I didn't understand it because I was a Negro, and I like Negroes very much." In The Negro Speaks of Rivers, Hughes replaces his father's racial self-hatred with his own racial self-identification, rooted in American geography and history, but also extending beyond them. The poem presents ancestral memory, not autobiographical disclosure. The experience it depicts exceeds that of any one life. Traveling across continents and historical eras, Hughes's poem describes three rivers rather succinctly: the Euphrates, Congo, and the Nile. The references to the Euphrates and the Nile evoke events that took place at different epochs in antiquity. The reference to the Congo forthrightly straddles contemporary and earlier history. A scholar has called the Congo a pastoral, nourishing, maternal setting for the poem, suggested by the speaker's memory. Quote, "It lulled me to sleep," end quote. But the Congo also carries a harsher association: King Leopold's violent exploitation of its population and resources. When The Negro Speaks of Rivers appeared in Hughes's debut collection, The Wary Blues, a poem close to it, Proem, more directly mentioned this oppression, declaring, "The Belgians cut off my hands in the Congo." Taken together, the three rivers suggest the grandeur and suffering of Black history. They evoke the African roots of civilization and slavery's painful legacy into the 20th century. The fourth river in Hughes's poem, the Mississippi, differs from the three. It serves as the great mythic river of American culture and literature. Hughes's description depicts a more specific event: Abraham Lincoln's journeys on the Mississippi in 1828 and 1831. Hughes more confidently described these trips as a turning point in American history. Hughes wrote, "I looked out the window of the Pullman at the great muddy river flowing down toward the heart of the South, and I began to think what that river, the old Mississippi, had meant to Negroes in the past. How to be sold down the river was the worst fate that could overtake a slave in times of bondage. Then I remembered reading how Abraham Lincoln had made a trip down the Mississippi on a raft to New Orleans, and how he had seen slavery at its worst, and had decided within himself that it should be removed from American life. The Mississippi forms the poem's inspiration and primary scene. It also receives the most detailed description, including the poem's only name, Abe Lincoln, and the most developed image. I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. The Negro Speaks of Rivers returns to what Hughes calls a pivotal moment in American life. Like Hughes's train journey from America to Mexico, the poem crosses national borders, yet remains distinctively American. Its cadences draw from Walt Whitman and Carl Sandburg, two of Hughes's early influences. The poem also presents a longer, historical, mystical knowledge. It offers a racial wisdom formed by ancestral memory. The repeated line, "My soul has grown deep like the rivers," insists on this point. that the poem draws from the soul's ancient knowledge accumulated over great expanses of time and distance, not limited by them. The Negro speaks of rivers. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I have seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Hughes traveled widely, both within America and abroad. In 1932 and 1933, Hughes visited the Soviet Union with 22 other African-American artists and intellectuals hired to make a film about blacks' lives in the South. The film was never made, but Hughes's time in the Soviet Union inspired him. He wrote a number of poems that expressed what one of his biographers calls Hughes's steady move to the left. Both Good Morning America and the even more explosive Goodbye Christ, which calls for an international workers' movement, made Hughes pay. Followers of Amy Semple McPherson, a prominent American evangelical, accompanied by a sound truck blaring a recording of God Bless America, picketed a reading Hughes was scheduled to give, leading him to withdraw from it. More damagingly, a number of anti-communists used the poem to attack Hughes. Hughes, you will recall, is the Negro communist poet famous for the communistic, atheistic poem Goodbye Christ, J. Edgar Hoover's aide advised him in a memo. Subpoenaed to appear before the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, Hughes faced a number of pointed questions about his poem, Goodbye Christ. Hughes defended himself in several different ways. He called Goodbye Christ an ironical and satirical poem. When pressed about particular passages, Hughes demurred that poetry may mean many things to many people. Switching tactics, he described Goodbye Christ as a dramatic monologue, a poem written in the voice of a speaker notably different than that of the author. Hughes said, "I have explained the poem for 22 years, I believe, in my writings in the press and my talks as being a satirical poem, which I think a great pity that anyone should think of the Christian religion in those terms, and a great pity that sometimes we have permitted the church to be disgraced by people who have used it as a racketeering force. That poem is merely the story of racketeering in religion and misuse of religion, as might have been seen through the eyes at that time of a young Soviet citizen who felt very cocky and said to the whole world, 'See what people do for religion? We won't do that. I write a character piece, sometimes as a play. I sometimes have to play the villain. I do not believe in the villain.'" Hughes's defense does not renounce the poem. Rather, it shifts responsibility for the ideas it expresses and limits its scope to an attack on religious hypocrisy. The poem, though, bears no markers of a Soviet speaker. Instead, American slang and references abound. Grilled by the subcommittee's members and its chief counsel, Roy Cohn, Hughes needed to invent a villain, one who speaks without the author's endorsement. Hughes deflected blame for the radical socialist atheism by recasting it as a sign of Soviet arrogance. He did not deny that the poem criticizes racketeering in religion and misuse of religion. However, Hughes also added, "I do not believe in the villain myself." As one scholar notes, Goodbye Christ echoes Soviet anti-religious propaganda and campaigns for the new Soviet man. The calls for Marxism to replace Christianity and create a new revolutionary personality. Marx, communist, Lenin, peasant, Stalin, worker, me, as he writes in the poem. Hughes's testimony strips the poem of its revolutionary charge. This strategy shows the complex relation of American poetry to nationhood. Goodbye, Christ. Listen, Christ, you did all right in your day, I reckon, but that day's gone now. They ghosted you up a swell story, too, called it Bible, but it's dead now. The popes and the preachers have made too much money from it. They've sold you to too many. Kings, generals, robbers, and killers, even to the Tsar and the Cossacks, even to Rockefeller's church, even to the Saturday Evening Post. You ain't no good no more. They've pawned you till you've done worn out. Goodbye, Christ, Jesus, Lord, God, Jehovah. Beat it on away from here now. Make way for a new guy with no religion at all. A real guy named Marx. Communist, Lenin. Peasant, Stalin. Worker, me. I said me. Go ahead on now. You're getting in the way of things, Lord. And please take Saint Gandhi with you when you go, and Saint Pope Pius, and Saint Amy McPherson, and big black Saint Becton of the consecrated dime. And step on the gas. Christ, move. Don't be so slow about moving. The world is mine from now on, and nobody's gonna sell me to a king or a general or a millionaire.
Like, subscribe, notification bell, join the herd.
And you got a good friend, having been right by your side.